So Tadek Beutlich was one of the leading textile artists of the post-war era. Renowned for his bold approach to craft, and his work is characterised by abstract compositions, as you've just seen, inspired by organic shapes, rhythms found in nature. His use of contrasting vibrant and earthy tones, combined with richly varied textures, push the boundaries of traditional weaving and materials. He was born in Loek, in Poland on the 19th of April 1922, to a Polish mother and a German father who ran a delicatessen and a confectionery factory. And when Tadek was 8, financial problems forced the family to move to Poznan, where he eventually enrolled at the Academy of Fine Arts on a scholarship. And it was here that he underwent training in general fine arts without much interest in print or textiles at the time. During his early years as a student, he was profoundly influenced by one of his teachers who taught him not to think and just to do it, which is an ethos that resonated throughout his career, and I hope we can bring it here to the room today when we're doing the activities. So after the Nazi invasion of 1939, Tadek, as a Pole of German origin, was registered on the nationality list and received German citizenship. And here he studied art for a term in Weimar, and then at Dresden Art Academy, before being drafted into the army in 1941. He was training as a radio operator and listened to BBC broadcasts, which confirmed his doubts about the regime that he was serving. He was sent to Russian front and to Italy, and this is when he was taken prisoner by the Allied forces in a prisoner of war camp. He was later released to join the 2nd Polish Corps as part of the British 8th Army. So complex themes of unease and conflict, reflecting his time at war and in a prisoner of war camp, would evidently influence his much later works. And it was at a time of great distress for him, as we can see on screen with the last few pieces I've shown you. And after the war, Beutlich continued studies in Rome and visited Italian museums, which allowed him to soak up even more international influence before he was evacuated to Great Britain in 1947. And it was at this point that he settled here in Lee, in northern England, along with many other Polish evacuees. It's important to note that up to this point, Tadek had not developed a printing or textile practice at all, but he was an active sketcher. And this chapter of drawing is an often overlooked but revealing facet of his creative practice. Little of his artworks are well archived or documented during this time in the north, but we know he was immensely interested in the creative opportunities Britain had to offer. He created a portfolio of works with applied ink on paper, producing countless expressive depictions of people and crowded scenes. And it's clear that he was creating manuscripts and drawings to document his thoughts and inspirational local findings, activities in the area, and his artistic plans to come, as well as recording his much darker experiences. But rather than focusing on precise detail, his drawings emphasised atmosphere, and although he didn't use drawings as a reference for his prints later in life, these themes of often strained figures or crowds are a visual parallel with his textile works later in his career. Sorry, bear with me. So this local association with Tadek has not only helped preserve his legacy within the region, but has also played a vital role in promoting and celebrating contemporary and experimental art across the Wigan Borough. So Beutlich soon received a government scholarship granted to soldiers who went into the reserves, which allowed him to study painting and drawing at the Sir John Cass Institute in London, and a visit to an exhibition of French textiles and finished carpets led him to abandon painting and drawing for a new focus on crafts. He was inspired to begin creating in his small bedsit, where he wove using a flat weave on a simple frame, a lot like this one on screen, and this was made by his brother-in-law. He could only use natural materials that were available and the mending threads available just after the war, which were produced in only 3 limited colours, white, grey and black. And his time at the Sir John Cass Technical Institute and the portfolio that he created at home on his flat weave gave him enough creative training to transfer here to Camberwell School of Art and Crafts in 1950. So Beutlich also created many amazing prints that incorporated natural materials and rivaled his textiles in quality, some might say. Often extra large scale, as we've seen, his prints are typically described as block prints or relief prints and were hand printed without a printing press. And this meant that he used manual pressure with his own hands or tools like spoons. He worked with another artist at Camberwell School called Michael Rothenstein, and the 2 students devised further inventive methods for printing that didn't involve any presses or technical equipment.
It's worth noting as well, I keep going to say, but we should have pointed him out, shouldn't we, in the room?
Yeah, we can show him at the end. So these methods would really come in handy when studio spaces and facilities were unavailable or inaccessible. And these methods would also change the way we teach and apply by print today. And Michael Rothenstein's artwork on screen here has gone on to be a huge success as well. He's now included in several collections like this one, the Tate Gallery, Victoria and Albert Museum and the Fry Art Gallery as well. Many people are surprised at how big and vibrant Beutlich's prints are when they're seen in person. But some prints focus on elements such as birds' beaks and insects. Many are more generalised with natural phenomena such as radiation and pollination and sun and heat waves or sunsets. His approach was ultimately rooted in a deep desire to work independently of machines. He embraced a raw, physical process, often printing in unconventional settings such as his garden or kitchen table, rather than the formal studio or a print room. And without access to specialist equipment, he improvised by using slices of tree trunks from his garden as printing blocks, and even walking across paper to transfer the image with pressure of his own boots. For him, the act of making was deeply personal and tactile. His hands and imagination were the only tools he truly needed, though he only focused on printmaking for around a decade of his career. The period proved remarkably prolific. His prints, infused with texture, immediacy, resonated with commercial clients too, and brought him significant financial success. Without machines, his print work reflected his core belief that creativity flourishes through direct physical engagement with materials. And he created most of his prints during the 60s, like the one on screen, titled Pollination, when both art and science sought new understandings of and new ways of representing the world and its natural organic forms. Heatwave in Antarctic on Screen was printed in 1967 as an edition of 75 prints. In the bottom, 1/3 of the print, it's clear that he used wooden planks to create a textured surface. The round shapes in the middle of the work may also have been printed using a charred cross section of a wooden post. From 1951, Beutlich became a guest lecturer at Camberwell, where he had originally studied and was exposed to crafts. And between 1963 and 69, he sold work successfully to County Council, school loan collections, including Buckinghamshire, Manchester, West Sussex, Hertfordshire and London City Council. Over to you, Anna. So Tadek Beutlich believed that planning by sketching first was a disservice to the materials that he worked with. However, he would often base his textile work directly on the inspiration of his prints. So for example, what you're making right now wouldn't be a sketch or a plan sketch, but he would go on to make textiles that homage or look similar to what you're making now. And due to this, his prints and textiles are often shown in close proximity to one another to complement this crossover.
And just before you move on from that thingy, the central kind of like talon-like piece, that one is also held in the Wigan collection.
Is it?
Yeah.
Very cool. So, side note as well, this a lot of this collection is actually for sale online. It's really affordable artwork. So if you're interested in actually collecting art by interesting artists that have made history, like Tadek, I would advise go and check it out because you can actually buy some of his very small textile works for around £50 and they're original pieces. So you could own some of this wonderful work. His prints are around 700 and up, but for the art market that's very cheap. So it was during his second year at Camberwell that Barbara Sawyer arrived to teach Tadek's art and crafts class. And she took her students on a trip to Gospels in Ditchling in East Sussex. Gospels was an arts and craft colony founded in 1921, also known as the Guild of St. Joseph and St. Dominic. It was a unique experiment in communal life in the early 20th century and survived until 1989. It hosted weaving and calligraphy as its main subjects of craft. The iconic hand weaver, Ethel Mariette, set up her weaving workshop at Gospels, and her workshop attracted large numbers of visitors and buyers. And it was here that Beutlich met Ethel herself in person, which was a game changer for his knowledge on colour theory and dyes, especially as she was a traditional British hand loomer and weaver, significant in the development of the craft during the first half of the 20th century. Beutlich was also taken to visit the firm R. Gregg and Co. in Manchester by his tutor, where he met the designer, weaver and yarn specialist Margaret Leishner. Both Ethel and Margaret's imaginative treatment of yarns had a profound influence on him and his subsequent practice. His understanding of colour theory within textiles would last a lifetime, and he went on to reference Ethel and Margaret's techniques throughout his own career. So on screen is an example of Tadek Beutlich's hand-dyed and coloured yarns, mixed with long, soft, shiny vegetable fibres, which enabled his work to move into much larger sculptural scale. The hanging is varied in colour and pattern, creating a visual richness from every thread. And just for scale, this is a hanging piece probably about the height of myself, and this big pom-pommy area is probably about the size of my head. And some moments within the sculpture have been given micro loops at the end, which is quite quintessentially Beutlich in its design. And this particular work can be found in the Touchstones Rochdale collection in Greater Manchester. So if you want to go and visit that, you can actually request to see it. And later in 1967, Beutlich actually bought the Gospels weaving workshop for himself after Ethel died, to work and live in the place that had inspired him and his young passion for textiles. And it was here that he began making his most confident and largest body of experimental textile works. It's said that he struggled to afford the cost of Gospels, but persisted regardless. And Ethel's vegetable dyeing handbook remained a close companion of his, even as he grew and gravitated towards much more modern ideas throughout the years. In 1967, the same year he bought Gospels, Tadek Beutlich participated in the third and later fourth Lausanne Biennial in Switzerland and was included in the exhibition titled British Artist Craftsmen, toured by the Smithsonian Museum at the University of California at Los Angeles. And this brought him to North American audiences, and he was described as Britain's greatest artist in fibre in the 1972 book titled Beyond Craft, the Art of Fabric. And although his work became internationally known, in Britain it was only known to a very small circle of critics. And due to this, he began to feel very isolated in Britain, where the landscape of experimental textile artists didn't always connect with his own ideas. He looked further afield for support and was drawn to the remarkable weavings of Polish textile artist Magdalena Abanowski, who created radical sculptures from woven fibres. These sculptures were not hard, they were very, very soft, but ambiguous, organic, towering, monumental works that hung from the ceiling and pioneered a new form of very intimidating installation. He also discovered the work of Wojciech Sadly, known for his immense pendulous works, which caused a stir because of their very abject, haunting nature at the first International Biennial of Tapestry in 1962. Beutlich expressed his admiration for their artwork and began a new chapter of his own with haunting, dry, figural textiles, homaging his iconic and surreal compositions, but with a very new, provoking presence. Such as this one on screen titled Moon. This was produced by Beutlich in 1963. He incorporated traditional tapestry techniques, but became experimental with the density of the work to look both sheer and full at the same time. So he used open weave structures and incorporated unusual materials such as woven camel hair, unevenly spaced and irregular in pattern. Other very experimental works are my absolute favourite, this one. Include this, it's a reflection of the moon, made in 1977, and it's still considered a very crucial work by weavers all over the world because of its very unusual elements and compositions. And it's important to note that in this work there are things like wood, and it's lovely to think of those overlapping natures of like he was using wood and strange materials to print with, and then he was taking exactly the same kind of tools and materials to put into textiles as well. So Beutlich also explored the three-dimensional possibilities of textiles on a grand scale, with thanks to newfound buyers and the international acceptance of his works. he managed to source materials such as sisal and jute. So sisal is one of the strongest natural fibres available. It's stiff fibre, can be spun onto a yarn-like material. It has a natural creamy white hue, but can be dyed any colour. And then there's jute, which is woven from the stalks of jute plants in India and Bangladesh. It has a natural brown hue and can be dyed most colours. Although it's not as tough as sisal, it is very soft to touch. And with access to these new materials, Beutlich made large-scale, three-dimensional hangings from the fibres, like Bird of Prey, which is one example of his most monumental wall hangings. Made of both sisal and jute, suggestive of a looming bird, the hanging is richly varied in pattern and density, with long elemental plaits that are held vertically. What is evoked in a hauntingly beautiful but intimidating and mythical image of a creature almost invites us in to wear it as a costume. Many of Beutlich's grand and unusual sisal and jute works were required from local authorities and private clients with great success. And he maintained contact with Polish artists living across Great Britain and became a member of Group 49, a famous collective exhibiting works in Polish-owned galleries based in London. But some of his works caused controversy because their textile medium was deemed as women's work. His methods of dyeing and composing textiles was also very rarely seen at the time, especially post-war, when coloured materials were very rare to come by. Nonetheless, his works were bought for schools and civic centres by local authorities and by a range of private clients. And it was at this time he finished writing a book, The Technique of Woven Tapestry, which became the first and only English compilation on the subject at the time. And it's a really nice book. I actually found this one in a charity shop, very, very cheap. It was really sad to see it like knocked down in price so many times. But it's got a beautiful array of illustrations by Tadek himself, loads of photos of examples of work and lots of methods that he suggests people use when trialling their own experimental textile designs. And Beutlich resigned from teaching in Camberwell in 1974 to move to Alicante in Spain with his wife Ellen and their son Matthew. It's a side note to say that Ellen was also a really, really successful printmaker who we met at Camberwell many years before when he was studying, and they actually kind of worked as a collective together, selling their works to local communities, schools and what have you. So she was just as successful as him, but also probably quite overshadowed by him because he's a man. And she didn't get as much attention, but she worked with him to sell her works through his name quite a lot. So he didn't take a loom to Alicante in Spain, but instead experimented with local Esperato grass, which is a brightly coloured acrylic wools bought at local Spanish markets to make what he called free wrap tapestries. So he was weaving and wrapping with organic wall hangings and freestanding pieces to look like living organisms. And he would actually go out and collect the grass sometimes himself when he travelled through Spain. And based on everything we've just learned, we're going to pass over to Anna and we're going to have a go at a few textile pieces of our own. So, as we know, Beutlich up to now had decided to focus on the quality and texture of his textiles. And his prints and flat weave tapestries were initially inspired by nature, but his work in later life was much more murky, dreamy, sometimes quite surreal, with violent or quite saddened figures. For example, in 1980, Beutlich created a series of packed figures that sat within sculptures. often trapped or staring out into the distance. At a glance, these works depict communities or bustling transport, like this one, a boat, perhaps. But on closer inspection, these quite harrowing scenes were filled with panic and stress, compacted inside a very tense composition. The natural colours of the fibre create muted overtones for the scenes, and the woven frame surrounding the figures traps and ties them into place. Critics often compared these works to the like of Goya, Goya and Bosch, both of whom Beutlich admired. And their works all encompass surreal suspense and representations of damnation in human nature. Tadek Beutlich openly used these sculptures as a way of communicating early life at war in a way that words couldn't quite imagine. And today, a much larger selection of Beutlich's print and textile works have been drawn from his studio and remain in collections internationally, with themes of folk, nature, war, knotted creatures, people, and fungus. And these show his range of experimentation with materials, from woven grasses and fibres to sculpted, lost and found objects held together with PVA glue. Wigan's Drumcroon Collection had the honour to show and own his works, which had promoted experimental mixed media in the Wigan Borough. I was kindly sent over the catalogue from Charlotte, thank you very much. And I've actually got a quote here that I really liked from the catalogue, which describes his studio around the date of 1982. So I'll quote that here for you. There is nothing to prepare a visitor for the brilliant blaze of colour and texture which greets him as Tadek opens the attic studio door. The room is dominated by a handful of completed or nearly completed striking weavings, such as burning moss, flat on a table close to the one window, looking large in scale and wonderfully vivid in colour in this small room. Or honeycomb structure, nicknamed Turkey by his wife, which hangs like an animal carcass in the centre of the room, slowly turning in the natural currents of air. Purples and blues, reds and oranges alternatively predominate as it revolves, clearly illustrating that it is indeed to be seen in the round. Other works brought back from Spain are neutral in colour range and are characterised by the fungus-like structure which he has incorporated by dipping cotton wool into glue solution and then into a pot of paint. He describes himself as being a good starter but a poor finisher. The room bears witness to this, with layers on layers of partially finished pieces of all shapes and sizes piled on top of one another on the side bench, or hanging or leaning against the wall. Tadek said, quote, "My trouble is that I have so many ideas. Every time I start something, I think about how it could be done differently. My wife tells me that I've got the brain of a grasshopper." So Tadek Beutlich's work really sadly lost momentum around the late 70s, which is also when he was really active in printing. And his unusual application of designs made him stand out amongst his peers, but also made him alienated by his peers. In 1982, around the same time that Drumcroon actually exhibited his works, he was rediscovered by lots of young artists and curators who brought him back to the forefront of craft icons, as well as back on the art market. His work entered collections such as the V&A Museum and the Tate London. And it's important to note that his work is rarely seen on permanent displays in museums and galleries, but are very often available to see up close on request at galleries and museums, including Touchstones in Rochdale. So don't hesitate to ask or contact them if you would like to see some Tadek works up close. Before Beutlich died, aged 88 in 2011, he was celebrated in a touring solo retrospective and was appointed MBE in 1993. In March 2011, Beutlich's prints were on public display just a month after his death in an exhibition titled Tadek Beutlich Prints and Textiles, which was based in Ditchling, where his fascination with weaving and craft began. His intriguing and enjoyable art forms are examples of play and curiosity within found materials. They remind us that textiles can be more than flat, functional or practical. They can be micro ornaments without purpose. They can be storytelling vessels, or they can host emotions. Looking at his unusual woven forms stirs a sense of curiosity and wonder. His unexpected shapes and textiles invite us to question how they were made and what stories they might hold. His creations also remind us to stay curious as artists and thinkers, to look closely at found objects, textiles, textures, colours and nature, to see creative expression even in the smallest tactile makes. And that is the end of the lecture. And look at that, Charlotte, 5 past.
I mean, that itself just deserves a round of applause.